Columbine High School shooting. In the quiet suburb of Littleton, Colorado, nestled against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, the spring of 1999 felt like any other. Columbine High School stood as a beacon of suburban normalcy, a sprawling campus of brick and glass where teenagers laughed in hallways, scribbled in notebooks, and dreamed of futures beyond the classroom. But beneath this veneer of ordinary life, a darkness was brewing, a malevolent force that would shatter the illusion of safety and etch the name Columbine into the annals of American tragedy. Two young men, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, both seniors at Columbine, were spiraling into a vortex of alienation and rage, their minds consumed by a vision of destruction so chilling it would haunt the nation for decades. Their story is not just one of violence, but of a profound, unsettling descent into a mindset that turned classmates into targets and a school into a slaughterhouse. What drove them to orchestrate one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history on April 20th, 1999? To understand, we must peer into the shadows of their lives, where resentment festered, and a toxic brew of isolation, anger, and mental turmoil set the stage for unimaginable horror. Eric David Harris, born April 9th, 1981, in Wichita, Kansas, was the son of a U.S. Air Force pilot, Wayne Harris, and his wife, Catherine. His childhood was marked by constant upheaval, as his father's career shuttled the family across states, Ohio, Michigan, New York, before finally settling in Littleton, Colorado, in 1993. To outsiders, Eric was a paradox, a bright, articulate teen with a disarming smile and a knack for blending in. He played soccer, wore preppy clothes, and worked as a shift leader at Blackjack Pizza, where his charisma could charm coworkers and customers alike. But beneath this facade, a darker Eric lurked. His peers described him as volatile, his temper flaring like a match struck in a dry forest. On his website, under the pseudonym Reb, he unleashed torrents of vitriol, railing against everything from country music to stupid people who mispronounced words. "You know what I hate," he wrote, his words dripping with venom. "Stupid people. Why must so many people be so stupid?" His rants weren't just complaints. They were a window into a mind seething with contempt for the world around him. Eric wasn't just angry. He was calculating, his hatred fueled by a cold, almost clinical desire to dominate and destroy. Psychiatrists later labeled him a psychopath, a term that in his case meant not just a lack of empathy, but a chilling hunger to inflict pain. Harris wanted to hurt people, said FBI Supervisory Special Agent Dwayne Fuselier, a stark contrast to the typical troubled teen. His journals revealed a godlike complex, a belief that he was above humanity, destined to purge it of its flaws through catastrophic violence. Dylan Bennett Klebold, born September 11th, 1981, in Lakewood, Colorado, was Eric's foil, tall, lanky, and painfully shy, with a mop of dark hair and a demeanor that seemed to shrink from attention. Raised in an upper-middle-class family, Dylan was the son of Thomas and Susan Klebold, liberal pacifists who attended a Lutheran church and nurtured their son's intellect. As a child, Dylan excelled in gifted programs, played baseball, and formed early friendships, including with Brooks Brown, a neighbor who would later ride the same bus as Eric. But as he entered adolescence, Dylan's world darkened. He felt like an outsider at Columbine, a school where jocks in white baseball caps ruled the social hierarchy, and he was just another face in the crowd. His journals, discovered after the massacre, were a heart-wrenching tapestry of despair, filled with hearts and anguished confessions of unrequited love for a girl who barely knew he existed. "I have no happiness, no ambitions, no friends, and no love," he wrote, calling himself a god of sadness trapped in the most miserable existence in the history of time. Unlike Eric's outward rage, Dylan's pain turned inward, manifesting as depression and suicidal ideation. He didn't just want to destroy others. He wanted to obliterate himself. Yet his alliance with Eric transformed his self-loathing into something far more dangerous, a shared fantasy of apocalyptic retribution. The two met in middle school at Ken Carroll, their friendship forged in the crucible of shared alienation. They weren't the stereotypical loners of early media reports. They had friends, work jobs, and even attended prom just days before their attack. But their bond was a crucible for something sinister. Together, they fed off each other's darkness, Eric's psychopathic ambition and Dylan's suicidal despair intertwining like a twisted vine. They called themselves the Trenchcoat Mafia, a loose group of misfits who wore long black coats, though the media later exaggerated their connection to a gothic cult. Their shared interests in violent video games like Doom, heavy metal music, and Nazi imagery. Eric's fascination with Hitler was no coincidence. The attack was planned for April 20th, Hitler's birthday, fueled their fantasies of chaos. But it wasn't just cultural influences or bullying, as some speculated. The FBI and psychologists concluded that their motives were far more complex. Eric's psychopathy drove him to seek infamy, to dwarf the carnage of the Oklahoma City bombing, as he boasted in videos they recorded, now infamously known as the basement tapes. Dylan, meanwhile, saw the attack as a way to end his pain, a final act of destruction that would take others with him. I believe Eric went to the school to kill and didn't care if he died, while Dylan wanted to die and didn't care if others died as well, Fuselier noted, capturing the chilling synergy of their motives. Littleton in 1999 was a sleepy, affluent community, its streets lined with tidy lawns and sprawling homes. Columbine High School, freshly renovated, was a point of pride, with its gleaming library and bustling cafeteria. But beneath this idyllic surface, tension simmered. Bullying was rampant, particularly against those who didn't fit the mold of the school's athletic elite. Harris and Klebold, though not the outcasts mythologized by early reports, felt the sting of exclusion. Eric wrote of being mocked in his face, while Dylan told his father the jocks gave Eric hell, though they left him alone. These slights, real or perceived, fed their narrative of victimhood, a justification for their growing obsession with vengeance. Their journals and videos reveal a plan that wasn't just about settling scores, but about achieving infamy on a scale that would shock the world. They wanted to be remembered, not as students, but as architects of destruction, their names synonymous with terror. The basement tapes, recorded in the weeks before the massacre, are perhaps the most haunting glimpse into their minds. In grainy footage, Eric and Dylan laughed, bragged about killing 250 people, and apologized to their parents, not out of remorse, but as a formality. They spoke of their bombs, their guns, and their dream of surpassing the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. "We're going to have followers," Eric predicted, his voice eerily calm. They mocked stupid people, reveled in their arsenal, and planned to target anyone in their path, jocks, minorities, or random students. Their rhetoric was laced with racial slurs and a chilling glee, as if they were starring in their own apocalyptic movie. These tapes, sealed until 2027 under the National Archives, reveal not just their motives, but the performative nature of their violence. They weren't just killing, they were staging a spectacle, one they believed would cement their legacy. Alienation and rage were the twin engines of their descent. Eric's psychopathy gave him a framework to channel his hatred into a grand, destructive vision, while Dylan's depression made him a willing accomplice, eager to escape his pain through a final, catastrophic act. They weren't driven by a single incident, bullying, video games, or Marilyn Manson, as the media speculated, but by a toxic confluence of mental illness, social isolation, and a culture that glorified violence. Their plan, meticulously crafted over a year, was not an impulsive outburst, but a calculated nightmare, designed to maximize death and terror. As April 20th, 1999 approached, the two teens stood on the precipice of infamy, their minds consumed by a vision of chaos that would soon engulf Columbine High School. The stage was set, the bombs were built, and the world would soon know their names, not as students, but as monsters. April 20th, 1999, dawned bright and clear in Littleton, Colorado, the kind of spring morning that promised warmth and normalcy. At Columbine High School, students streamed through the halls, their laughter echoing off lockers, unaware that the clock was ticking toward a nightmare that would redefine terror in America. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, two seniors cloaked in black trench coats, were not just students today. They were executioners, their minds alight with a meticulously planned symphony of chaos. Their arsenal, hidden in duffel bags and under their coats, was a ticking promise of destruction. Homemade bombs, shotguns, a semi-automatic rifle, and a pistol, all primed to unleash hell. Their goal wasn't just murder, it was spectacle, a performance of violence meant to rival the Oklahoma City bombing. As the lunch hour approached, the school buzzed with the energy of a typical Tuesday, until 11:19 a.m., when the first shots rang out, and the world turned upside down. What unfolded over the next 49 minutes was a harrowing descent into carnage, a story of shattered lives, failed bombs, and a tragedy that would leave 13 dead and a nation forever changed. The plan was diabolical in its ambition. Harris and Klebold had spent months crafting propane bombs, each packed with enough explosive power to level parts of the school. Their scheme was to detonate two 20-pound propane tanks in the cafeteria at 11:17 a.m., when nearly 500 students would be eating lunch, creating a fireball that would kill dozens, if not hundreds. As survivors fled into the parking lot, the duo planned to gun them down from strategic vantage points, then detonate car bombs to maximize the body count. Their journals and the basement tapes revealed a chilling obsession with scale. Eric boasted of wanting at least 250 deaths, a number that would eclipse any prior act of domestic terror. They had studied the school's layout, memorized schedules, and even calculated the cafeteria's peak occupancy. The bombs were their masterpiece, the opening act of a massacre meant to cement their names in infamy. But as 11:17 a.m. came and went, the cafeteria remained intact. The bombs, shoddily wired with faulty timers, failed to detonate, a silent misstep that altered the course of their deadly script. Undeterred, Harris and Klebold shifted to Plan B, their faces set with a cold resolve as they approached the school's west entrance, weapons in hand, ready to rewrite history with bullets instead of explosions. At 11:19 a.m., the first shots shattered the springtime calm. Rachel Scott, a 17-year-old junior, was eating lunch on the grass near the west entrance with her friend Richard Castaldo when Harris and Klebold emerged from their cars. Without warning, Eric raised his 9mm high-point carbine and fired, the bullets tearing through Rachel's chest and head. She crumpled to the ground, her life extinguished in an instant, the first of their victims. Richard, hit multiple times, collapsed beside her, his body racked with pain but clinging to life. The gunfire was a clarion call, a signal that the nightmare had begun. Students nearby froze, their minds struggling to process the surreal horror unfolding before them. Some thought it was a senior prank, a cruel joke with firecrackers, until they saw the blood. Harris and Klebold, their faces alight with a terrifying mix of glee and detachment, advanced toward the school, their trench coats billowing like dark wings. They tossed pipe bombs, crude devices they called crickets, onto the roof and into the parking lot, where explosions sent shrapnel flying, sowing panic among fleeing students. Inside the school, the atmosphere shifted from routine to chaos in seconds. Teacher Patty Nielsen, standing near the west entrance, saw the two gunmen and initially mistook their weapons for props. "Get down," she shouted to students as she dialed 911, her voice trembling as bullets whizzed past. She was grazed by glass and shrapnel as Harris fired through the glass doors, his laughter cutting through the screams. The 911 call, later released, captured the raw terror. "There's a kid with a gun," Nielsen cried, her words punctuated by gunfire and the wail of alarms. Students scrambled under tables, hid in closets, or bolted for exits, their footsteps pounding against the linoleum as the reality of a massacre sank in. Outside, Deputy Neil Gardner, the school's resource officer, exchanged fire with Harris near the west entrance, but his sidearm was no match for the attackers' firepower. Harris, unfazed, returned to the school, his focus unyielding, his mission clear: maximum destruction. The duo's rampage took them through the halls, where they moved with a chilling efficiency. Daniel Rohrbaugh, 15, was shot dead outside the cafeteria as he tried to flee, his body collapsing in a pool of blood. Sean Graves and Lance Kirkland, both 15, fell nearby, wounded by a hail of bullets, their screams mingling with the chaos. Kirkland, shot in the face, played dead, his survival hanging by a thread. Inside, the gunman tossed pipe bombs into the cafeteria, where hundreds of students cowered under tables. The bombs exploded with deafening roars, but the propane tanks, intended as the centerpiece of their attack, remained silent, a stroke of fortune amid the horror. Surveillance footage, later analyzed, showed students running in every direction, some crawling to safety as the gunman laughed and fired indiscriminately. "This is what we always wanted to do," Dylan shouted, his voice carrying a twisted exhilaration, as if he were living out a fantasy from doom. The library, a haven of books and quiet study, became the epicenter of the massacre. At 11:29 a.m., Harris and Klebold stormed in, where 52 students and staff hid under tables and behind shelves. "Get up," Eric bellowed, his voice a snarl of authority. When no one moved, he fired a shotgun, the blast echoing like thunder. The carnage was swift and merciless. Kyle Velasquez, 16, was the first to die, shot in the head as he sat at a computer. The gunmen taunted their victims, their words dripping with sadistic glee. "Do you believe in God?" they asked Isaiah Shoels, an 18-year-old African-American student, before shooting him dead under a table, their racial slurs chilling the air. Cassie Bernal, 17, was killed after reportedly answering yes to the same question, a moment that sparked a myth of martyrdom later debated by survivors. One by one they fell. Stephen Kernow, 14, Casey Rugseger, 17, wounded, Matthew Kechter, 16, Daniel Mauser, 15, Kelly Fleming, 16, John Tomlin, 16, Lauren Townsend, 18, and Corey DePuter, 17. The library floor ran red, the air thick with gunpowder and screams. Evan Todd, a 15-year-old jock, survived by hiding behind a pillar, though he later recounted the terror of hearing Dylan reload. The click of the magazine, a sound he'd never forget. The gunman's rampage wasn't just random. It was theatrical, a performance fueled by their desire for infamy. They hurled insults, mocked their victims' fear, and reveled in the power of their weapons. Yet their plan was unraveling. The bombs in the cafeteria hadn't detonated, and their car bombs, meant to kill first responders, sat dormant in the parking lot. By 11:35 a.m., as sirens wailed and SWAT teams mobilized, Harris and Klebold seemed to lose focus. They wandered the halls, firing at lockers and ceilings, their initial frenzy giving way to a strange, aimless energy. They returned to the cafeteria, attempting to detonate the propane bombs manually, but only managed to start a small fire when a Molotov cocktail ignited. The sprinkler system doused the flames, another failure in their apocalyptic vision. By noon, the school was surrounded by police, helicopters buzzing overhead, and news crews broadcasting the horror live to a stunned nation. The climax came in the library, where Harris and Klebold returned at 12:08 p.m. The room was a tableau of devastation, bodies strewn across the floor, survivors trembling and hiding. The two stood near the windows, their faces blank, as if the weight of their actions was finally sinking in. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that their time was up. Eric knelt, placed his carbine under his chin, and pulled the trigger. Dylan followed, his TC-9 pistol ending his life moments later. The gunshots, the last in their 49-minute spree, marked the end of the massacre. They had fired 188 rounds, thrown 76 pipe bombs, and killed 1312 students and one teacher, Dave Sanders, who bled out in a science room after heroically evacuating students. 21 others were injured, some permanently, their lives forever altered by the bullets and bombs. The resolution was as haunting as the attack itself. As SWAT teams swept the school, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. Bodies in the library, blood-soaked hallways, and terrified survivors huddled in closets. The cafeteria bombs, still intact, were defused by bomb squads, a grim reminder of how much worse the toll could have been. By evening, the nation watched as students reunited with frantic parents, their tearful embraces juxtaposed against the grim procession of body bags. The death toll, 13, was staggering, but the psychological scars ran deeper. Littleton, once a sleepy suburb, was now a synonym for tragedy. The failed bombs, meant to kill hundreds, were a chilling footnote, proof that Harris and Klebold's vision of total destruction had been thwarted by their own incompetence. Yet the damage was done. Columbine High School, once a place of learning, was now a crime scene, its halls echoing with the ghosts of a day that would never be forgotten. The aftermath was a frenzy of grief and questions. Why had the bombs failed? How had two teenagers amassed such an arsenal? News reports speculated wildly about bullying, video games, even Marilyn Manson, But the truth was more complex. The basement tapes, later reviewed by investigators, showed Harris and Klebold laughing about their revenge, their voices devoid of remorse. They had wanted to be gods of chaos, and for 49 minutes they were. But their failure to detonate the bombs meant their legacy, while infamous, fell short of their apocalyptic dreams. The nation, gripped by fear and fascination, began to grapple with the reality of school shootings, a phenomenon that Columbine would come to define. The story of April 20th, 1999, was not just a tragedy. It was a warning, a dark mirror held up to a society that had failed to see the monsters in its midst. On April 20th, 1999, at 11:19 a.m., the first gunshots tore through the spring air outside Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, shattering the illusion of a peaceful suburban morning. As Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, cloaked in black trench coats, unleashed their arsenal of guns and bombs, the school descended into a maelstrom of panic and bloodshed. The world outside was oblivious at first, but within minutes, the piercing wail of sirens and the staccato crack of gunfire signaled a crisis unlike any the quiet community had ever known. Law enforcement scrambled into action, their radios crackling with urgent calls, as teachers, students, and first responders faced a nightmare unfolding in real time. Harris and Klebold, however, were not just killers on a rampage. They were architects of chaos, moving with a chilling purpose, evading capture through their intimate knowledge of the school's layout and their suicidal resolve. For 49 agonizing minutes, the police pursued shadows, racing against time to stop a massacre, only to find that the killers had written their own ending, leaving behind a trail of devastation and unanswered questions. This is the story of the frantic pursuit, the elusive gunman, and the haunting moment when the gunfire fell silent. The first call to 911 came at 11:19 a.m., a desperate plea from teacher Patty Nielsen inside the school. "There's a kid with a gun," she screamed, her voice trembling as bullets shattered the glass doors near the west entrance. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, already stretched thin across a sprawling county, sprang into motion. Deputy Neil Gardner, Columbine School Resource Officer, was eating lunch in his patrol car near the school when the call came through. His radio buzzed with reports of shots fired, explosions, and students running for their lives. Gardner sped toward the west entrance, his heart pounding, unsure whether he was facing a prank, a lone gunman, or something far worse. As he arrived, he saw Eric Harris standing on the hill outside, his 9mm high-point carbine glinting in the sunlight. At 11:22 a.m., Gardner exchanged fire with Harris, the crack of his service pistol answered by the rapid bark of Harris's rifle. Bullets kicked up dirt and shattered glass, but Harris, unfazed, retreated into the school, his trench coat flapping like a dark omen. Gardner radioed for backup, his voice urgent. "Shots in the building. I need someone in the south lot with me." The pursuit had begun, but the hunters were already outmatched. Inside, Harris and Klebold moved like specters through the halls, their boots echoing against the linoleum as they fired indiscriminately. They knew Columbine's sprawling layout, its maze of corridors, stairwells, and classrooms, better than anyone. Months of planning had given them a tactical edge, their journals detailing escape routes and choke points where they could ambush responders. Pipe bombs, dubbed crickets, exploded in the distance, their blasts sowing confusion as students and teachers hid under desks or barricaded doors. The cafeteria, where their propane bombs had failed to detonate, was a scene of pandemonium, with hundreds of students crawling to safety as surveillance cameras captured the chaos. Harris and Klebold tossed more bombs, their laughter cutting through the screams, as if they were starring in their own apocalyptic video game. Their evasion wasn't just physical, it was psychological, their unpredictability a weapon as deadly as their guns. "This is awesome," Dylan shouted, his voice carrying a twisted exhilaration as they roamed the halls, untouchable in their reign of terror. Outside, the response escalated with dizzying speed. By 11:25 a.m., deputies from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and officers from the Littleton Police Department converged on the school, their sirens a rising chorus against the backdrop of gunfire. SWAT teams, summoned from Denver, were en route, but the distance, 20 miles through midday traffic, meant precious minutes ticked by. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors a relentless drumbeat, as news crews descended, broadcasting the horror live to a nation frozen in disbelief. The school's perimeter became a war zone, with officers taking cover behind patrol cars, their weapons trained on the building. Reports poured in, multiple gunmen, bombs exploding, students trapped inside. A makeshift command post sprang up in the parking lot, but the information was fragmented, contradictory. Were there 3 shooters? Hostages? Snipers on the roof? The chaos fed the tension, each radio call tightening the knot of fear. At 11:27 a.m., a pipe bomb detonated in the parking lot, its blast shaking the ground and forcing officers to duck for cover. Harris and Klebold, it seemed, were everywhere and nowhere, their presence a malevolent shadow slipping through the school's arteries. The pursuit intensified as officers tried to breach the building, but the sheer scale of the crisis overwhelmed their training. Standard protocol for active shooters, enter and neutralize, was still evolving in 1999, and many officers hesitated, fearing booby traps or an ambush. Inside, teacher Dave Sanders, shot in the chest while directing students to safety, lay bleeding in a science room, his life slipping away as students pressed shirts against his wounds. His desperate pleas for help, relayed through 911 calls, underscored the urgency. "I'm losing blood," he gasped, his voice fading. Outside, students poured from exits, some bloodied, others sobbing, their stories of gunfire and bodies piling up in the library. At 11:31 a.m., a second exchange of gunfire erupted near the cafeteria, as Deputy Paul Smoker fired at Klebold, who ducked behind a wall, his .9 pistol blazing in return. The shooter's mobility kept them one step ahead, their familiarity with the school's layout allowing them to vanish into its depths before officers could close in. The library, where the worst of the carnage unfolded, was a fortress of terror. Between 11:29 and 11:36 a.m., Harris and Klebold killed 10 students and injured 12 more, their taunts and laughter chilling the survivors hiding under tables. "Peekaboo," Klebold mocked before shooting Cassie Bernal, his voice a twisted parody of playfulness. The police, still outside, had no clear path to the library, their movements hampered by the fear of bombs and the lack of a cohesive plan. A fire alarm, triggered by explosions, wailed incessantly, drowning out screams and making communication nearly impossible. At 11:44 a.m., a Denver SWAT team finally arrived, their heavy gear clanking as they prepared to enter. But Harris and Klebold were always moving, their erratic path, through the cafeteria, the halls, back to the library, making them impossible to pin down. Their journals later revealed they had considered taking hostages or luring police into a trap, but their focus was on destruction, not negotiation. They weren't hiding. They were hunting, their every step a defiance of the forces closing in. The tension reached its peak as the clock neared noon. Officers, now numbering in the dozens, surrounded the school, their radios alive with reports of more explosions. A Molotov cocktail ignited a small fire in the cafeteria, quickly doused by sprinklers, but the threat of the propane bombs loomed large. Bomb squads were called in, their expertise needed to assess the duffel bags left in the cafeteria, each one a potential catastrophe. Students trapped inside relayed messages via cell phones, their whispers painting a grim picture. Bodies in the library, blood on the walls, the gunmen still prowling. At Clement Park, adjacent to the school, parents gathered, their faces etched with terror as they waited for news of their children. The media, now a swarm of cameras and microphones, amplified the chaos, their live feeds showing students running, some wounded, others carrying makeshift stretchers. The nation watched, breathless, as the pursuit unfolded, each moment a pulse of dread. Would the shooters escape? Were they planning a final stand? The climax came abruptly, a resolution as sudden as it was devastating. At 12:08 p.m., Harris and Klebold returned to the library, now a graveyard of their making. The room was silent but for the whimpers of survivors and the distant wail of alarms. The two stood near the windows, their weapons heavy in their hands, their faces unreadable. They had fired 188 rounds, thrown 76 pipe bombs, and killed 13 people, 12 students and 1 teacher. Their dream of a bombing to rival Oklahoma City had failed, their propane tanks inert, their car bombs undetonated. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the realization that their spectacle was faltering, but the end was near. Eric, the architect of their apocalypse, knelt and placed his carbine under his chin. A single shot rang out, and he collapsed, his blood pooling on the library floor. Dylan, the reluctant god of sadness, followed moments later, his TC-9 pistol ending his life in a final, hollow echo. The gunfire stopped, the silence deafening, as the two architects of Columbine's nightmare became their own final victims. The resolution was a bitter unraveling. SWAT teams breached the school at 12:20 p.m., moving cautiously through the halls, their weapons drawn against an enemy already gone. They found the library at 12:30 p.m., a scene of unimaginable horror. 10 bodies sprawled across the floor, blood and bullet casings everywhere, survivors trembling and hiding. Harris and Klebold lay dead, their trench coats splayed around them, their faces frozen in the aftermath of their own violence. The cafeteria bombs, still intact, were defused by experts, a chilling reminder of the catastrophe narrowly averted. Dave Sanders, the heroic teacher, was found dead in the science room, his students' efforts to save him in vain. By 2:30 p.m., the school was declared secure, but the toll was staggering. 13 dead, 21 injured, and a community shattered. The pursuit had ended not with a capture, but with the shooter's suicides, a final act of evasion that left police with no one to arrest, no one to question. The aftermath was a whirlwind of grief and chaos. Officers escorted survivors to safety, their faces pale as they passed the bodies of classmates. Parents at Clement Park wept, some reuniting with their children, others learning the unbearable truth. The media frenzy intensified, reporters clamoring for details as helicopters circled above. The police faced scrutiny. Why had they waited so long to enter? Why hadn't they stopped the shooter sooner? Later investigations revealed a lack of training for active shooter scenarios, a gap that would reshape law enforcement protocols nationwide. Harris and Klebold's evasion, enabled by their suicidal intent, meant there would be no chase, no standoff, only questions. Their deaths closed the pursuit, but opened a wound that would never fully heal, as Littleton and the nation grappled with the horror of what had happened inside Columbine's walls. April 20th, 1999, had burned itself into the soul of Littleton, Colorado, like a scar that would never fade. By 12:08 p.m., the gunfire at Columbine High School fell silent, leaving behind a shattered campus and a nation reeling in horror. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the architects of a massacre that claimed 13 lives, lay dead in the school's library, their bodies surrounded by the carnage they had unleashed. The pursuit was over, but there would be no capture, no handcuffs, no courtroom drama to sate the public's hunger for justice. The killers had written their own ending, their suicides a final, defiant act that left investigators grasping at shadows. What followed was a desperate search for answers, through blood-soaked halls, chilling videotapes, and the fragments of two twisted minds. The investigation into their motives would unearth a darkness that chilled the blood, while the aftermath sparked changes that reshaped schools and society. Yet, even as the world tried to close the book on Columbine, questions lingered, whispers of secrets still buried, hinting at a story far from finished. This is the tale of a case that ended without closure, a mystery that continues to haunt, with threads left dangling for those brave enough to follow them. The absence of living suspects was a gut punch to law enforcement. By 12:30 p.m., SWAT teams sweeping Columbine's halls found Harris and Klebold sprawled on the library floor, their weapons beside them, their trench coats soaked in blood. Eric's carbine had ended his life with a single shot under the chin. Dylan's TC-9 pistol had delivered his final escape. The scene was a grim tableau. 10 students lay dead around them, their bodies crumpled under tables, blood pooling on the carpet. The air was thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder and the wail of fire alarms, a relentless reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. Outside, parents at Clement Park clung to hope or collapsed in grief, as officers escorted survivors to safety, their faces pale with shock. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, under Sheriff John Stone, faced an unprecedented crime scene, 188 rounds fired, 76 pipe bombs scattered across the school, and 2 propane bombs in the cafeteria, mercifully inert. There would be no arrests, no interrogations, only the cold reality of 2 dead teenagers who had taken their motives to the grave, or so it seemed. The investigation began in a frenzy, as detectives descended on the school, piecing together a nightmare. The basement tapes, recorded by Harris and Klebold in the weeks before the attack, became the chilling centerpiece of the probe. These videos, filmed in Eric's basement, were a grotesque performance of bravado and hatred, the duo laughing as they showcased their arsenal and boasted of killing 250 people. "We're gonna have followers," Eric crowed, his voice cold and prophetic, as if he knew their names would echo through history. They apologized to their parents, not out of remorse, but as a formality, while mocking their victims and planning a spectacle to dwarf the Oklahoma City bombing. The tapes, sealed until 2027 by the National Archives, revealed a chilling truth. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst, but a meticulously planned act of terror, fueled by a toxic blend of rage, alienation, and a hunger for infamy. Investigators pored over the tapes, transcribing every word, searching for clues to what drove 2 teens to such monstrous extremes. "Harris wanted to hurt people," said FBI agent Wayne Fuselier, while Klebold wanted to die. Their motives, though, were a labyrinth, defying easy answers. The search for why led to the killer's journals, a haunting archive of their dissent. Eric's writings, scrawled under his pseudonym Reb, were a manifesto of psychopathic rage, filled with rants against stupid people and dreams of annihilation. "I want to leave a lasting impression on the world," he wrote, his words dripping with a godlike arrogance. Dylan's journals, by contrast, were a cry of despair, pages littered with hearts and laments of unrequited love, his self-loathing spilling over into suicidal fantasies. "I'm a god of sadness," he scrawled, his pain a mirror to Eric's hatred. Together, their writings painted a picture of a deadly symbiosis, Eric's cold ambition and Dylan's longing for oblivion, fused into a plan to destroy everything in their path. Investigators found evidence of their preparation, receipts for propane tanks, gun shop visits, even a diagram of the school's cafeteria with X marks for bomb placement. They had tested pipe bombs in nearby fields, their explosions a grim rehearsal for April 20th. Yet, the question lingered. What pushed them over the edge? Bullying? Mental illness? The allure of violent media? The answers were as elusive as the killers themselves. The investigation widened, probing the edges of their world. Friends like Brooks Brown, who had known Dylan since childhood, were questioned. His eerie encounter with Eric that morning. "Brooks, I like you. Get out of here." A haunting footnote. The Trench Coat Mafia, a loose group of misfits the duo associated with, was scrutinized, but no evidence linked them to the plot. Parents Wayne and Catherine Harris, and Thomas and Susan Klebold, faced intense scrutiny. Their homes searched for clues. Had they missed warning signs? Eric's father had noted his son's bomb-making materials, dismissing them as science experiments. Dylan's mother later spoke of her son's hidden pain, her grief a public reckoning, in her 2016 book. The media frenzy amplified the mystery, with early reports blaming video games, Marilyn Manson, or a gothic subculture, none of which held up under scrutiny. Psychologists pointed to Eric's psychopathy and Dylan's depression, but the truth was messier, a confluence of factors that defied a single narrative. The investigation, spanning thousands of interviews and 10,000 pieces of evidence, became a quest not just for facts, but for meaning in a senseless act. The climax of the aftermath was not a trial, but a reckoning that reshaped America. With no suspects to prosecute, the focus turned to prevention. Columbine exposed gaping flaws in school security and law enforcement tactics. The delayed SWAT response, hours to clear the school, sparked outrage, leading to new active shooter protocols that prioritized immediate action. Schools nationwide adopted zero-tolerance policies, installed metal detectors, and trained for lockdowns, transforming campuses into fortresses. The tragedy fueled debates over gun control, with Harris and Klebold's weapons, purchased through loopholes like the gun show exemption, highlighting lax laws. The Brady campaign and others pushed for reform, though change was slow, mired in political gridlock. Mental health screening in schools gained traction as educators grappled with how to spot troubled students before they turned violent. Columbine became a blueprint for studying school shooters, its name a shorthand for tragedy. Yet, even as policies changed, the wounds remained raw. The 13 victims, Rachel Scott, Daniel Rohrbaugh, Dave Sanders, and the 10 in the library, etched into memorials and hearts. The resolution was anything but tidy. By late 1999, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office released a report detailing the timeline and failures. The missed warning signs, like Eric's website rantings reported to police a year earlier, and the propane bombs that could have killed hundreds. Lawsuits followed, targeting the school, the sheriff's office, even the killer's parents, though most were settled or dismissed. The basement tapes remained a source of fascination, their contents leaked in fragments, fueling public curiosity. Why had the bombs failed? Could the attack have been stopped? The questions piled up, each one a thread in a tapestry of unresolved pain. Survivors like Patrick Ireland, who crawled out a library window with bullet wounds, and Devin Todd, who hid from the killer's taunts, shared stories of resilience, but also of trauma that lingered like a shadow. Littleton rebuilt, the library replaced by an atrium, but Columbine's legacy was indelible, a wound that bled into every school shooting that followed. And yet, the story doesn't end here. Whispers of hidden truths persist, details in the sealed basement tapes, unreleased police files, and the untold stories of those who knew Harris and Klebold best. Did others suspect their plan? Were there missed chances to intervene? The investigation closed, but the mystery lingers, a dark puzzle with pieces still missing. Columbine was not just a tragedy. It was a warning, a glimpse into a darkness that still stalks the edges of society. What drove two teens to such horror? And what might lurk in the minds of others, waiting to erupt? The answers, if they exist, lie beyond this page, in the shadows of a story that refuses to be fully told. To uncover the next chapter, the secrets still buried, the voices yet to speak, follow our channel for the continuation, where the echoes of Columbine reveal new truths that will leave you breathless.